Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and in this video we are going to be tackling two big questions. And those questions are, is a HiFiMan DAC amp right for you? And if so, which one? Because today we are going to do a roundup of the HiFiMan EF400 DAC amp, which is currently about $530 US, the HiFiMan EF600 DAC amp, which is currently about $800 US, and then the HiFiMan Golden Wave collaboration, the Serenade, which is currently $1,000 US. I have reviews for each of these three pieces out individually. I will put links to those videos in the description down below. I will also put links where you can buy these products from a couple of retailers in the description as well. If any of those links are affiliate links to help support the channel, I will label them as such. All three of these units were sent to me direct from HiFiMan. They have asked nothing in return from me other than fair and honest evaluations of them. And in this video, you get a bonus video because after I reviewed all three of these, questions started coming in about how do they all compare to each other. So we will dive into that here in this video right after shameless self-promotion.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
So we should probably start by considering the question, is a DAC amp the kind of product that you are interested in to begin with? And so I will just give some quick thoughts on why I think you may or may not want to consider a DAC amp. So a DAC amp is an all-in-one unit that combines a digital to analog converter and in this case, these cases I should say, headphone amplifiers, okay, in a single box, basically. The Serenade here goes a step farther than that, and it has some preamp functionality in it, as well as offering a LAN-based streamer inside there as well that is compatible with Roon and DLNA and a couple of other streaming protocols. Okay, so a nice part about a DAC amp is that you get that multiple functionality in one box, which means that you have less wires to deal with. You have more placement-friendly options, okay, taking up less desk or shelf space or wherever it is this is going to go in whatever system you're going to use it in. They just tend to take up less space and be less physically cumbersome to set up and sometimes use than a separate stack of, like, if you were to say have a DAC, an amp, a preamp, or a streamer, all in separate chassis, okay, in your equipment rack, on your desktop, wherever it is that you're going to use these things. So that's really one of the big draws there in terms of there's the physical simplicity of having everything in one box, okay, taking up less space, less wires, that sort of thing. Also, just the general simplicity. It's much easier to build a system, particularly if you are starting out from scratch, with a DAC amp. You don't have to buy two boxes or more all at the same time. You can just buy one. Okay, so building a system, again, particularly from scratch when you're first starting out, is another big draw of the DAC amp, I think. Now, there are some inherent disadvantages to DAC amps. One of them being the same as the advantage, just looked at from the other way, and that's that you have everything in one box. You can't customize the sound of the DAC or the amp and match two different sound signatures that you like to create a new and unique sound signature of the two of them working together. You're just kind of stuck with whatever is inside the box. Another disadvantage is that if one of the components inside the box fails, say the DAC goes out but the amp is fine, then to replace that you kind of have to junk the whole box unless there are connections available, which we'll get to in just a moment. Okay, but that is one of the issues that you could run into with a DAC amp. And then sonically speaking, DACs are coming from a position of disadvantage as compared to separates because they have to do things like share a power supply, okay? Share physical real estate within the same box, which means that there can be electrical interference of the DAC interfering with the amp or vice versa, right? Particularly if the internal design is not well shielded. Okay, and often they aren't particularly well shielded, particularly when you're talking about sub 1,000 US dollar pieces, because the price is going into, like the cost of making this is going into other aspects like part selection and that sort of thing, and not always into the shielding. Okay, but let's assume that you have made the decision that a DAC amp is right for you, and you are looking at these three HiFiMan options, and they are sounding pretty attractive to you. And that makes sense, because I have reviewed all of these, as I said, and I liked them all. I really raved about the EF400. I thought for its price it was amazing. The Serenade recently I also think is really solid and a really excellent value because of all of the things that it brings in. The EF600 is the one that personally excited me the least, but it has some sonic attributes and some features about it that I think will excite a fair number of users, and they will really like this one too. So we're going to unpack all of that, okay, throughout the course of this video here. All that. So a quick rundown then of what each of these things are, in case you have not seen all of my review videos before. So the EF400 here, we'll just go in order of increasing price. The EF400 is the one in the middle here, right, is the simplest in terms of feature set. Not surprising because it's the least expensive model here. Okay, it is built on an earlier edition of the Himalaya R2R DAC chip, which is a resistor ladder DAC on a single chip, basically. And so HiFiMan calls that their Himalaya R2R DAC. This one had one of the earlier versions of that DAC in it. It has only USB input. It has both balanced and single-ended analog outputs that are DAC only. There is no preamp function on it or anything like that. Okay, and then it's got like both single-ended and balanced headphone outputs of multiple flavors up front. You have high and low gain here with an oversampling and a non-oversampling mode for the DAC. Okay. Generally, you're going to want to use oversampling mode in most DACs that offer the option, and then non-oversampling if you are going to use these with an external digital filter. So something like HQ Player or some other nice digital filter from a software player that you're using to play music files or something like that. You're going to want to generally use OS, although I did find that the oversampling mode on this particular piece just wasn't that great, so I ended up preferring the non-oversampling kind of across the board on this one. Not always the case, but is here. Okay, so a stripped down feature set on this one. It's got a pretty potent amp in it for the price. It did a decent job of driving really hard to drive loads like the HE6 SEV2, which again, it did a decent job of, but that's a really power hungry headphone, and for a while was available for a price where someone might want to pair that with this amp here. But again, EF400 is just really a simple design in terms of it's got a DAC, it's got an amp, you can access the DAC outputs as a line out mode only, and that's it. Okay, USB input, we're off and running. Now, when I reviewed the EF400, I said things like, I think some important things that it might be missing are, one, the option of an analog audio input, and then also having a SPDIF digital input, and then offer that package for maybe $700, okay? Because I think this one was about $600 at the time. Just a little bit later, HiFiMan released the EF600, which was almost exactly what I asked for there, because this one steps up the R2R DAC quality. It uses the Himalaya Pro DAC chip in it. Okay, it ups the amplifier power just a little bit by spec anyway. It offers two analog inputs, a balanced and a single-ended analog input. So if you had a turntable or something like that and you wanted to access the headphone amp in here, you could plug it in that way. Okay, and then it also added both SPDIF input on it in coaxial, RCA coaxial flavor, and then also it has Bluetooth connectivity on it. And it also has this very interesting form factor that doubles as a headphone stand on it right here. So, and then they changed the volume knob on it and all of that too. So it has a very unique aesthetic, very unique look to it, and all of that. And for those extra features, you're talking about an $800 unit now. The Serenade on the bottom here is not actually made by HiFiMan. I believe it was commissioned by HiFiMan, but Golden Wave, which is a Hong Kong-based hi-fi company that HiFiMan recently acquired, did the actual design and building of the Serenade. And it was originally $1,200 US, now $1,000. It is a DAC and an amp. It also uses the Himalaya R2R Pro DAC chip in it, which is like the latest and greatest brand spanking new Himalaya DAC chip in there, at least for the price. Okay, it added preamp functionality to it, so the analog outputs, which are both balanced and single-ended on the back, are now variable and you can function as a preamp. And then, of course, it added a streamer on top of there as well, which again is compatible with a number of streaming protocols. And I really liked this unit too. I thought it was pretty well fleshed out, sounds great and all of that in there too. So let's just peel back the layers of the onion here and just like kind of compare all of these sonically and talk about what you get as you step up with each one over the other, so you can make a good decision about how much money you should be spending here. And so forth. I should also add that the Serenade adds both optical and coaxial SPDIF inputs. It's got USB input on it and all of that. So it has, and still has Bluetooth. So it has a more robust input configuration. And then it has a single-ended analog audio input on it as well if you want to connect a turntable or something of that nature. Okay. Sonically speaking here, I think as the price goes up, the technical performance of each device sonically does improve. So the EF600 has a little bit superior technical sonic performance to the EF400, and then the Serenade takes it another step up yet above that. What changes to my ear here on this, though, is also like the sound signatures. These three products, even though they have roughly the same lineage and use like roughly the same basic tech in them and all of that, just at different levels of pricing, they do have different sonic characters in addition to being different in like sonic technical ability. So let's, again, we'll peel back the layers of this onion, and hopefully doing so doesn't make anyone cry. All right. The EF400 here, when I reviewed it, I just really fell in love with it. It had a very, like, kind of neutral, warm, okay, so not quite true neutral, just leaning a little bit warm, slightly rolled off top end to it, but it just has a very active, lively, energetic kind of presentation to it, which was mostly coming from the DAC. The amp in it, best I could tell, is fairly transparent, but that DAC injects a lot of its own flavor that just gives it kind of this like active, fun, and lively sound. Not the most resolving sound in the world there. Like there are there is some detail retrieval left on the floor, particularly for the price point here, but it's not poor in that regard, but it's just a very, again, warm, fun, punchy, engaging, kind of lively sound to it. Okay, but for the money, it sounds great to my ear. Okay, now I should caution you, there has been another reviewer, I believe it was Golden Sound, that measured one of these and found that there was just a slight, like kind of the channel alignment in terms of the phasing was off just a little bit on his unit. I have not heard the audible effects of that. If they are present on the unit that I have, it sounded really good. If there were any issues with this one that I had, it's like the potentiometer here is a little bit splashy and it's got some channel imbalance at the lower ends here. So that was one complaint. The other one is that it takes a little bit more warm-up time than the other two. And for me, it always sounded like the left channel took a little bit longer to warm up than the right channel. So there was a little bit of a channel balance issue for about the first 2 or 3 minutes that I would listen to it. And then after that, like sometimes my memory is when I would switch from a high-resolution PCM file, like, you know, a 96 kilohertz sampling rate file, to a 44.1 kilohertz file, there would be a little bit of soft crackling for a little while for that first 44.1 kilohertz track. If I played another 44.1 kilohertz track after that, it was clean. It was specifically going from a high-res to a more standard, you know, Redbook kind of sampling rate, where I would notice that come in. So a couple of quirks did come out with the EF400, but that does not change the fact that once it's in its mode and it's running well, it's got that just that warm, punchy, lively, engaging, energetic kind of sound to it. that I really took to and really enjoyed when I had it. Okay. The EF600 increases the amount of resolution and detail retrieval that you get over the EF400. It becomes a little bit more holographic in its spatial presentation. All of these stage rather large in their presentations, okay, but the EF600 is better about the about the positioning effects and all of that within the sound field as compared to the EF400. Right, and so you get an increase in just overall technical ability with the EF600. However, I did not find the EF600 to be as lively or as energetic or as like dynamic in its presentation, okay, as punchy, that kind of thing as the EF400 is. It's not devoid of those things, it's just that those traits took a little bit of a step back. Another way in which the EF600 kind of had its own presentation and sonic color and flavor to it is that the mid-range actually came forward a little bit more than it did in the EF400. And that's not entirely bad. And this is where like I personally struggled with it a little bit because if you've watched my channel with any regularity, I have a lot of difficulty with headphones sounding honky or shouty or kind of cupped like a through a tube or through cupped hands kind of sound through a lot of the mid-range frequencies. And that is usually if the tonal balance between fundamentals and harmonics between about 1 kilohertz and 3 kilohertz is not quite accurate. That's when those effects, the shoutiness, the honkiness, the cuppedness kind of a thing, start to come out for my ears. That 1 to 3 kilohertz range is just a little bit more forward, a little bit more present, a little bit more accentuated through the EF600 to my ear than it is either of these other two. So it has a little bit of the warmth that the EF400 has, but not as much. It's not quite as lively or dynamic, and then it has that mid-forwardness to it that to my ears didn't work quite as well. But that can be an excellent match for some others, and also for, and I brought out like HiFiMan's own headphones here. Like one of the reasons HiFiMan's headphones work so well for me, I think, is they tend to start their ear gain region about an octave later than like say the Harman target calls for that a lot of other manufacturers go for. To some listeners, that makes them sound a little bit recessed through the mids. If that applies to you, or you just generally like forward mid-range, then what the EF600 can do with that slightly more forward mid-range with a somewhat mid-recessed, I'm going to put mid-recessed in air quotes because they do not sound that way to me. HiFiMans don't sound that way to me, but they might to you. Okay, but anyway, the slightly more mid-forward presentation of the EF600 can match that kind of sound quite effectively for some people there. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, the Serenade here, to me, of these three, is the most neutral in sonic character, at least from my perceived frequency response kind of thing. It is, though, like it did not stand out to me that it had, excess warmth or a treble roll-off or a mid-forwardness or anything. It was the one that just sounded the most flat to me, okay, the most truly neutral in perceived frequency response of these three. Then it's also like the most technically proficient of the three in terms of it's got the most resolution and detail retrieval and that sort of thing. Now, it's still not quite as lively or as dynamic or as energetic sounding as the EF400. It's maybe just a little bit more of that than the EF600. It is a little bit more refined and clean and like complete and put together kind of sounding than the EF600 is as well. So it's like it's a technical step up from the EF600. It's more neutral in perceived frequency response, and it just sounds more refined, complete, and like put together and realistic, I guess would be the right word there, than the EF600 does, at least to my ears. Okay, we're not talking huge jumps up in performance every time here, but I mean there is a noticeable improvement from 400 to 600 to then again to Serenade. Okay, so then let's start talking about like value and all of that kind of stuff. Like what are you getting for your money, okay, on these things? And even though it's the most expensive item here, I do think the Serenade may arguably be the best value of the three. And that's because the preamp functionality and the quality of the preamp is high. And then you've got that streamer in there, and the streamer in it is actually really good. Okay, I thought the streamer in it did not change the sonic character, but just improved the overall sound as compared to like the SPDIF inputs, all that, though the USB input on it is also pretty good. And so the presence of the preamp and the streamer really add to what this piece can do and makes it a much more flexible unit that I think will be relevant longer in most systems than either of the other two. So you just get the most for your money, even though it is the most expensive unit on here, I think. The EF600 has a nice feature set on it, and if you really need that slight bit of boost in the mid-range, like I have the HE1000 Stealth here because that's one where the slight mid-forwardness of it could really match well to that headphone. Then I think the EF600 becomes a nice value. And then it also, like, it's a headphone stand and all of that. It has some ergonomic features of it that in the right use case could really appeal to the right user. Okay. The EF400 to me is just really impressive in terms of what it does for the money. It just in terms of just pure performance per dollar, not necessarily taking in like adding in the dimension of features per dollar like the Serenade does. The EF400 is up there, but it does come with its quirks. Like you have to be the most patient with the EF400's sound. Give it enough time to warm up. Be ready to handle that slight crackling that happens with going from a higher sample rate to a lower sample rate. Okay, be willing to operate in the range where this thing has a bit of a splashy channel balance in its, or a bit of a channel imbalance in its potentiometer, just a generally splashy feeling potentiometer and all of that. The other thing I need to point out, these two, the two pure HiFiMans here, have a slightly high output impedance on them. And so that's going to make them a little bit less compatible with particularly low impedance dynamic driver headphones. That is not an issue on the Serenade. So that is another thing that you needed to take into account. The lower damping factor that these will offer with those low impedance dynamic driver headphones can lead to some excess bass bloat and less control in the low end on that kind of headphone. That doesn't really affect planars, and it can actually be an advantage with some high impedance headphones as well. So those things to keep in mind there. So just to kind of like wrap this up and put a bow on it here, yes, the sonic performance does get a little bit better as price goes up with each of these units. You do get more features as price goes up with these units here. I think pure sound, even though it might be it's the warmest and the most like lively and energetic, so it kind of colors the sound presentation a little bit more than the other two here, arguably, the EF400 here is still a really fun listen and a really excellent starting place if you're on a really tight budget. If you need vinyl and you can match to the right headphone, like if you're a vinyl user, I should say, and you can match the sound signature to the right headphone, the EF600 could be a really good value then. But then the Serenade here, to me, just when you combine the sonic performance and the feature set for the dollar here, then to me the Serenade is just still, like, even though it's the most expensive unit here, is the best value of the three. All right, so I am Wave Theory. These have been my thoughts and a little bit of a roundup on HiFiMan DAC amps. I hope we have answered the questions of, like, if a HiFiMan DAC amp is right for you, which one? And so tell me in the comments how that worked out for you and if we answered that question. So please like this video if you haven't as well. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. And as always, thanks for watching and enjoy the music.